What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the brand new film, The Invitation, get a release where it won the box office, but only with a paltry $7 million, as the box office is seeing one of its worst weekends since summer, of course, began. That's why it always drives me crazy when people consider August to be somewhat of a summer month, similar to that of May. I know that sometimes there are big films that get released in those months, which is the reason why they probably would consider that to be the case, but it drives me crazy nonetheless, because if I'm in school, it's not summertime, and I'm still in school for much of May and towards the very beginning of August, and so therefore I don't like how they do that. But this weekend, of course, I think is definitely showing that most people are back at school, and also that there's really not a whole lot of things out right now that have a lot of people's interest, because what are people actually going to see? If you look at the top 5, Dragon Ball Super in its second week of release, again, a specialty item there. Top Gun Maverick in its 14th week of release, still hanging around in the top 5, even after being out for 14 weeks. And then, of course, you have Beast and Bullet Train hanging around as well. Beast in its second week, Bullet Train in its 4th week of release, which is very good news for Bullet Train, but it still has a little bit of a ways to go. A dry box office spell might actually be a huge benefit for it, especially if it continues to have small drop-offs like it's having. But nonetheless, we can see the box office is definitely trending downward, and it's going to be quite a while until we get another massive release. In fact, I believe it's not going to be until maybe even October that we get any major tentpole films. I think Black Adam might be one of the next films to get a release. Again, I could be wrong on that, but that's the only film that's really coming off the top of my head. In fact, you know what? I like to do things live, and so let's go ahead and pull up the release schedule so we can see exactly what is going on over the next several weeks. And so you have next weekend, you have re-releases for Jaws and Spider-Man, so nothing really major new except for Honk for Jesus, which even I'm like, ugh, okay, that's a bit cringe. You have films called Barbarian and Medieval, not major films. You then have Clerks 3, which, yeah, there might be some people out there excited for, but hardly a major film. The Woman King, which... oh my goodness, please don't make me go watch that film. Don't Worry, Darling, Bros, Smile. Smile's the only one that I'm aware of because the trailer is really, really creepy. And then you go into October, and you have Halloween Ends, October 14th, and then, yeah, Black Adam, October 21st. So the next major film that costs crap tons of money to make, Black Adam, not coming out until October 21st. And that means you have the rest of August, you have the entire month of September where nothing big is coming out. I mean, they're even re-releasing Avatar in the wake of, or rather in preparation for, the release that it's going to have in December, because Avatar 2 is finally coming out, which is going to be the bane of my existence, especially covering it box office-wise, because I know it's going to do well, and I really don't want it to, because the first one really isn't good at all. But as you can see, really just not looking good as far as the box office and what's coming out going forward. So we can expect to see films like this. So The Invitation making $7 million in its opening weekend. We can expect to see similar numbers to this in the weeks ahead. And that's why it actually might end up being good news for films like Bullet Train or Beast or Maverick, who can stay around and hang out, especially Top Gun Maverick, still out at almost 3,000 screens, only lost 7 theaters. Again, 14 weeks of release. People still going to see it. And it's interesting that these are the films that people are going to see, and then you also have films like Lightyear, which people just didn't want to go see at all, and it's still technically out, but of course it's available for free on Disney Plus. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating to see the kinds of films that people want to see and people don't want to see. But Bullet Train is the number 2 spot, so it actually went up from the previous week, as I said, because of there being this dead spot. It actually was able to do better than Beast's second week of release, which is the reason why Beast, because its budget is not all that low, is actually not looking all that much of a sure thing as far as breaking even is concerned. But because we do have not a lot of stuff coming out, it does have a lot more potential than it would have in other times of the year. Top Gun Maverick coming in the number 4 spot once again, making another $4.7 million. Pretty much a foregone conclusion, especially as I mentioned earlier. With nothing really coming out, there's nothing to stop this film from getting to that $700 million mark domestically, unless Paramount pulls it from theaters, which I just don't think is going to happen, seeing that it's available on digital now for $20, and there's no announcement, at least I'm not aware of them actually having it available for rent at a much smaller price, and their actual physical media purchase is not going to be available until November. So, yeah. They've got a long way to go for them to milk basically as much money out of the film as they can. And you know what? When it's actually a good movie, I don't mind it as much. But of course, does make me mad that I have to wait until November before I can dive into some of the special features. Rounding out the top 5, though, is Dragon Ball Super, which had a massive 78% drop from last week. And at first I thought maybe they'd be pulling it from a lot of theaters, but no, it's still available at almost 3,000 screens. And so that's a pretty massive drop off, though the film not costing all that much to make means the film was already profitable as of last week and is now making even more profit, even though the number overall is not all that great. And then just the top 10 films, we have 26% drop for DC League of Super Pets, so that's hanging around, but still has a long ways to go to make its money back. You have a new release in 3,000 Years of Longing, where you have Idris Elba, I believe, and you also have, what's her name? She's just always so bizarre in everything she does. Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton in 3,000 Years of Longing, where Idris Elba plays essentially a genie or a djinn. And apparently this film also cost $60 million, and it only made $2.8 million in its opening weekend. Oh boy. Why do you have a film that should have cost independent level money coming out this way? I just don't have any idea. Minions continuing to hang around as well, though it is now making boatloads of extra money overseas because of China, because Universal likes to work with the Communist Party over there. We also have number 9 spot, Thor: Love and Thunder, still hanging out in the top 10. Hey, good for you. Good for you. Still not one of the most impressive of box office returns. And then Where the Crawdads Sing, still hanging around as well. Pretty impressive for a based off of a book series. So Invitation, as I mentioned, $7 million. Bullet Train up to $159.2 million. So if it continues to have the types of drop-offs, it actually has a chance to break even, but it's got to keep that up, basically, and it's going to be interesting to see whether the re-release, the one thing that I could see actually doing better than expected is the re-release of Spider-Man. I could totally see that film because it's going to claim to have a lot of extra features and extra, time in the film. I wouldn't be surprised to see that film maybe even get number 1 spot next weekend, just because the first film was so massive. But it'll be interesting to follow nonetheless. Beast, in the second week of release, is up to $36.1 million. And even though, again, the budget isn't all that high, only about $36 million, still only 1 times its production budget, a little over 1 times its production budget. Films need to make about 2.5 times in order to break even, so it's still a ways off as well. Top Gun Maverick, of course, massive hit, massive success, $500+ million in net profit for that film. Dragon Ball, $56.9 million worldwide. DC League of Super Pets, $38.1 million. You also have 3,000 Years of Longings, $2.8 million. But as I mentioned, with that $60 million price tag, let's see if they even have that in here. Sometimes the numbers does, sometimes it doesn't, but it is being reported by Variety, I believe, that this film cost $60 million, so just not looking good at all. We also have some updates for the film Nope. As I said, I think the international numbers, once those start to roll in, are going to start to make up some of the ground that was not quite there domestically, and sure enough, that is what's going on. This film was actually getting close to doubling what it made in its first 2 weeks of release, and a lot of that is because it was not available in any international markets, so this film is definitely on pace to do much better than what originally was expected. Elvis still hanging around as well. Jurassic World Dominion still not at $1 billion. Again, still made a lot of money. Still a bad movie, but still not at $1 billion, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. And then the movie Fall is, I guess, still around. I had to actually look for this film because it didn't show up in the weekly chart, but hey, this film also didn't have to make that much to break even, and I believe it finally has now at this point. Going into the actual box office charting, check out my website, ombReviews.com, if you want more about the actual charting. We can make some projections on the second weekend for Beast, so it making $36.1 million means I'm projecting it's going to make somewhere between $51 and $72 million by the end of its run. Because of the $36 million production budget, it needs to make around $90 to break even. Excuse me. So based off of those numbers, I suspect the film to lose somewhere between $10 and $22.9 million. So we'll have to wait and see, of course, whether or not that happens or not. But I do suspect that the film has a ways to go. It does have the opportunity to be able to take advantage of a slower market and not a lot of major releases coming out over the next couple of months. But even with that being the case, it's still... yeah, $32 million in the red right now. It is definitely a film that needs to do very well and not make any mistakes. Very similar to the story for Bullet Train as well. Right now, that's around $39 million in the red. And as you can see, it's getting very close to getting into the 60s territory, which would be one of the best case scenarios for this movie at this point. So we'll have to wait and see exactly where that film ends up in the long run. As I mentioned, Dragon Ball Super now at $19 million in the black, so kudos to them. Invitation did cost very little to make, and so I suspect that the film probably will make its money back. It is now only $10.8 million in the red, but again, it's a horror film that there's been a lot of trailers for, but not a lot of people actually went to go see it. I don't know why they didn't just wait until October to release this movie. I feel like this film would have better play in October, but Once again, it seems August, at least this year, has turned into January in most years in certain respects, which is, I again find to be very interesting. The film Nope, as I mentioned, is doing a lot better because of those international numbers. And so right now it's only about 12.7 million in the red. And so, as I mentioned before, even though my projections were saying the film was going to lose money, I did say once those international numbers came in, as long as they were consistent with some of his other movies, then it would probably be able to make up some ground. And so far it has. So the chance of this film breaking even is actually still a lot higher than previously indicated. And then, of course, you have the other films that are still hanging around. Again, 990 million for Jurassic World Dominion. Hey, still 346 million in the black, right? Still making a lot of profit there, but 63% compared to its first 2 weeks of release. It's pretty average, right? It's a pretty average release, and the movie itself was not that good. So I guess that is a good sign for them because they had bad word of mouth and pretty massive drop-offs, and yet we're still able to make this amount of money. But again, that is all being said as it is. Top Gun Maverick, of course, still massive. And once again, could even make it to making almost $600 million in net profits, which could make it one of the most profitable films of the year. And putting this up against the other profitable film for the last couple of years, Spider-Man No Way Home's $833. Yeah, it's not going to catch that. It's not going to catch the $833 million in net profit that Spider-Man No Way Home has. However, I will point out that Paramount is going to be able to essentially take all of that profit for itself, whereas when it comes to Spider-Man No Way Home, it had to split that profit 75% to Sony and 25% to Disney. So, hey, take that for what it's worth. As far as individual studios are concerned, though, Paramount doing quite well with this film. But that's going to be it for me today. Have you seen The Invitation? Have you have any interest in the films that are coming out? Again, not a whole lot of news going on right now, but again, you're looking at the numbers as they stand. Thor: Love and Thunder, 73 million in the black. As I mentioned, I think that $100 million is probably going to be where it caps out, if it even gets that point. And even though that seems like a lot of money when compared to its massive $250 million budget, it is definitely not all that impressive. Again, making its money back and making profit is still a good thing. It's still a successful movie, but in the grand scheme of things, when you compare this to some of the other Marvel movies, it's definitely not going to be one of the most successful. It's probably going to be one of the lowest grossing overall MCU films in history, which is just ultimately not a good sign for them going forward, especially with, again, Wakanda Forever coming out, or is it The Woman King? I get those trailers mixed up with each other, but let me know your thoughts about this or anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. Like this video, smash the like button, light up that fire button. Honestly, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.